Hello, my name is Shereemer Chevannes, and I am the Policy Associate of the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy at the Fortune Society. Welcome to Both Sides of the Bars, a discussion-driven show that examines the legal system from various perspectives, including people most impacted by the criminal legal system. We discuss critical questions about how the current system works, its intersections with social justice, and we highlight the efforts that are being made to improve the lives of everyone affected. We ask you, the viewers, to spread the word about both sides of the bars and share your comments with us on Twitter at the Fortune SOC. Today's show is entitled Housing Discrimination, Its Harm to Justice-Impacted Women, People Living with HIV/AIDS, and the LGBTQIA+ community. Betsy Ramos is the peer advocate of SWOC, the Sealed with a Kiss project at Brooklyn, New York-based A Little Piece of Light. Betsy is HIV positive and recently returned home after 24 years behind bars. We also have Grace DeTrevarah, who is the LGBT liaison at Bronx, New York-based the Osborne Association. She frequently speaks out about her empowering journey as a long-term HIV survivor and her fight for trans liberation. Welcome, Betsy and Grace. How are you both doing today?
Okay, thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I start with you, Betsy. Please tell us about yourself and give us some background.
I'm from Brooklyn. I was born in Brooklyn, raised in Brooklyn. I came from a good household. I started hanging out with the wrong crowd, looking for love in all the wrong places. My mother was a very strict disciplinarian. By the time I turned 28, I found out I was HIV positive. And in that time, being HIV, it wasn't HIV positive, everything was AIDS, AIDS, AIDS. And, you know, it was a taboo. Of course, you know, I didn't know anybody that was HIV positive like I was, so it was a solitary journey, you know. How do I say it? As a result of that journey, I got involved with an abusive man, and as a result of a crime he committed, I ended up going to prison. While I was in prison, I had cancer twice, not only on top of fighting my HIV, but I also developed other illnesses that are, you know, a direct result of HIV, being HIV positive. So that was a little, you know, rough.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And Grace, we'll turn to you. A little background about yourself.
Wow. First of all, thanks for having me. And
Absolutely.
I just love being here at the Fortune Society because this was the beginning of my journey of my advocacy. I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. I came to New York in 1984. I'm 59 years old. This year I'll be 60.
Congratulations.
In 1988, while doing a state sentence for forgery, I was in Auburn Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison at that time. And one of the requirements to obtain certain things that I wanted while I was in custody was having the ability to just be inclusive with everything that I touched. So I wanted, at that time, I just wanted to know what my statuses were, because we were dealing, as the whole nation was, HIV, but as my colleague here says, it wasn't called HIV then. When I was familiar, it started off as GRID, then AIDS. So I took my test in 1988, and it came back positive, and it didn't affect me physically because I had not really accepted it, because I didn't have all those attributes that the world was saying that's AIDS. I hadn't lost any weight, I didn't look gonk or wasting, none of those things. So I just lived almost somewhat as, not necessarily in solitude, I just kept my health right while I was in custody. And when I got the strength to do better, and what was better, educate, I did.
Wonderful, wonderful. We'll get into health a little bit later on, okay? So I'll start with you, Betsy. I'll go back over. Please give us your challenges that you experienced as a Latinx woman being incarcerated.
Wow. I think the majority of the prejudice, you know, the racial thing, is amongst ourselves. And that shocked me for the simple reason that I wasn't brought up that way. I didn't look at, you know, you're Chinese, you're this and that. We're all people. I mean, maybe my mother raised us with blinders on, I don't know. But when I went, you know, when I was incarcerated, I saw that that was a thing that people used to tear each other down. So if they know that you had a weakness, that was what they hit you with, and they didn't, if they didn't have anything else, you know? And that was astonishing to me, because you would think as women, we would be there to nurture and hold each other up.
Right.
And it wasn't so, you know? As time went on, you know, that changed because I changed, you know? Right. I wasn't in the dark, it wasn't a secret that I was HIV positive. And that opened a lot of doors with me interacting, you know, with my peers who weren't open with their status. And them seeing me do it and me talk so, you know, so freely about medication, about what doctor to see, about this and that. They gave them the courage to, you know, to go to support groups, you know, because they said, oh, Betsy does it, you know, let's, you know. So I had a good rapport with all the women. So that was beneficial to me in getting them the help or a space where they could speak about the things that we didn't want to speak, you know? Right.
That's wonderful. In a sense, you became a model for the rest of them.
I tried. You know, I tried.
Successfully.
Yes, I tried.
Right? So I'll turn to you, Grace. What were some of the challenges that you had as a trans woman of color while incarcerated?
Wow, that's a hoot of a story. I'm going to try to get this out in 2 minutes. I'm a very proud person, naturally. I'm very arrogant because I didn't come into the system the stereotypical way. I didn't come from a broken home, and I had a mother and father. I had education when I came into prison. However, that didn't mean anything, because as soon as people recognized, starting with staff and unfortunately the medical staff, it was hard, and you had to know how to navigate for yourself, and that still is. You had to know how to advocate for yourself. For me, I kind of put all my energies in other things that had to do with surviving while in prison. When it came to my status, I just took my meds and did what I was supposed to as far as the regimen. I didn't really deal with anything far as, you know, empowering others as I do today. For almost, I was diagnosed in 1988. I didn't really start advocating even for myself until probably like 1993, maybe like 3 or 4 years later. And that was because I can't say this for everyone, but you go through a form of denial. You go through a form of denial, especially if you don't have those attributes that the doctors say that you gotta have. And you know, I didn't have any of that. I wasn't losing weight. I didn't have any of those diagnoses that can happen when you're HIV positive. But it became very hard because for me to survive and advocate, so I took an easier route. I worked in law library, and then I found this group that the women prisoners started that came to Fishkill, and that was PACE.
And we named it, we have been named ACE.
Yes.
So that was our
PACE
refuge.
is Prisoners, AIDS, Counseling, Education. And it's really funny about this story because today I go around the world telling this story. PACE in 1988 in Sing Sing All the way probably till like 2000, and this is my opinion, until like 2000, maybe 12. The LGBT community that was in prison, you had trans people there, gay men, out people, but no one was being educated but our so-called straight prisoners.
Okay.
And PACE offices were direct from law library. So every day I would have to pass it. And I would see the little information and stuff, and I would, you know, be due to stigma, not shame. It was stigma protecting, not shame. I was never shamed. It was all, I didn't want the stigma. So I would wait till people out the way, and I would go sneak and read their stuff and all that. And the director, Malcolm Davis, who worked for Osborne at the time, came out and said, "Hey, how you doing? You like?" I said, "Hi." I said, "I like this information." So he came in, and all the staff, which were inmates, or better yet, prisoners, were Muslim, 5%ers, in my opinion, religious zealots. And they were the ones who ran this program, and then I figured it out. It hit me. This is why none of my peers in this prison is coming in here to get any of this information.
Okay.
So I liberated that by saying, let me go in here.
Right.
And that's how my education started. And we'll go further later.
Yes, absolutely. I'll keep it on you, and I'll ask challenges accessing health while being incarcerated.
Again, and I think I can say this for anyone who is HIV positive or even thinking about how they're going to navigate themselves. Please know this, you have got to open your mouth and ask questions, because I'm going to say when I was in custody, there was even so much fear and stigma with the medical staff that if you didn't have a way in which you could be tolerated, and that's a hell of a thing. I'm coming here to get services and I got to be tolerated. But if you can even be tolerated to ask a question, you went for it, and that's what I did. And once I went into PACE, I became very instrumental in becoming a part of that team. There was a lot of struggle with that because it came with sexual tension now, sexuality tension now. Because if you remember, as I said, PACE had a bunch of Muslims, 5%ers, and religious zealots, in my opinion, who were running the services there. And this is why the majority of people who were in population who were doing sex work, banging, meaning using drugs, multiple partners, nobody was going to PACE for anything. That was almost like a hangout spot for Muslims. Okay? So when I went in there, I was able to get that information, then I would take the information and go to the yard, and my girlfriends, I would pass that out to the girls.
Wonderful.
And that's how it started. And then it got back to PACE. Because I guess, you know, we all watch each other, regardless of what community you're from. And they went back, and I guess they put their little heads together, their little koofies together or whatever, and said, wow, I think that person, because they didn't know how to approach me. They didn't know how to say he, she. It was probably it, they, and whatever. They didn't know anything about any of that. So my journey when it came to, it just goes back to the word navigation.
Okay.
The big thing for everybody now and much later, you have to know how to navigate for yourself, and then you're able to navigate for others.
Wonderful. Okay. Okay. And Betsy, the same question to you, challenges in accessing health.
So my first challenge when I got to prison was that I had never told anyone except a few close people that I was HIV positive. And when I started examining, you know, everything that had happened that had took me to the place where I was at the time, I realized that one of the things, well, the major thing was that I was living in fear and I was living in silence. I didn't want to be judged either, and it was eating me alive. Because when you're HIV or you have AIDS and you don't talk about it, you kill yourself with it, because you take your medication in silence. You're scared to be yourself. You're scared that people is gonna recognize it. you know, because people expect you to look a certain way, they expect you to act a certain way, they expect you to come from a certain background. But I learned that that wasn't true. And I learned that with my story alone of how I got to prison, that if I made an example of not being scared, you know, and choosing to live my life differently, you know, because in my mind, if I had dealt with that diagnosis the way that I was supposed to, I wouldn't have gotten into the situation that I did, because that's what predators do. Predators, they lurk on the vulnerable. And I left myself open to a lot of things. And I promised myself that I wasn't going to ever be in that position again. And that's how I came out, you know, that I was HIV positive. And it was astonishing because more people cared than people who didn't. You know, the people who knew me and got to love me, they didn't care about any of that. And if I was personally attacked, they would have something to say about that, you know, because they didn't like, you know, bullying or any of that stuff. So the women there also gave me the courage, you know, to continue, you know, with this walk that I was walking. Wow. You know?
Wow, okay.
Can I reiterate something?
Sure.
Because my sister here said something just had me say this. The one thing that, because she specifically brought up HIV and AIDS, but I'm gonna go across the board here. Any type of diagnosis that ain't a cold,
yes,
while you're in custody, can become detrimental to your survival.
Absolutely.
And it starts, sadly, it starts with yourself. If you do not, and I'm speaking to those who are diagnosed, if you do not have the gut, the energy, the get up and go to help yourself, you are going to die. So a lot of times I had to push forward when it wasn't even necessary, because I knew that people, for me, being a black trans woman in a male prison in the 80s and the 90s, the stigma for HIV didn't affect me the way they described it, because I was already stigmatized as a black and being trans. So that part didn't have as much power as maybe it would for others. But for me, and I had to say that, because the one thing that empowers anyone is when you know that there's a light over there. It may not be a lot of light. It may not even be welcoming light. But if we just see a little light over there, we will find that. And my light for me, just speaking for light, once I became a part of the staff, prisoner staff of PACE, we were able to have groups my peers who stayed in the yard all day or at recreation or in their cells or in their rooms. They were now coming to PACE classes because we were doing all the stuff that says we can die. We in there shooting dope, we sniffing, we having multiple partners, we're doing sex work in prison.
Wow.
So it was necessary at that time, not only for me, but for my peers. To this day, a lot of those peers, I would love to believe that they're alive because they saw the empowering parts that they saw other people do that looked just like them. And I was just one of them. So I just had to say that.
No,
I just had to say
absolutely,
that.
absolutely. It adds to the conversation, right? So we'll pivot over to housing now, right?
Oh, yeah.
Challenges accessing housing once you're released from incarceration. Betsy?
So I have to say that when I found out I was positive, I didn't know anybody else who was positive. So what I did was I read on it, like I do everything. I'm a reader, you know? And I started teaching myself, you know? Because I wasn't gonna let this thing kill me, not without a fight. You know, I'm a fighter. So I started doing that, and it wasn't until 1990, I met my abuser in 1996. It wasn't until like 1997 that I finally got my HASA and all of that. But then that was, which HASA is housing for people, you know, who are HIV positive, who have AIDS, who have been diagnosed as AIDS.
Gotcha.
And people are familiar, you know, with Jiggets and what's the other thing they got? Hopwa. And
could you actually explain what Jiggets
these are
is?
all different. These are all different vouchers that people get for housing. So landlords have a huge problem with accepting vouchers. Like they'll say, "Oh yeah, I have an apartment," but as soon as you go with a voucher, you know, some people like it, some people don't. I guess for the mixed experiences. But it was even more difficult because they weren't aware of what HASA was. So I would have to explain to them what HASA was.
You're explaining your voucher.
I'm explaining my whole medical thing to you.
Right.
Because if I'm telling you what my voucher is, and for somebody who's living in silence and and in hiding, you know, that's not a thing that's easy to do. So I had to get off of that, because if I didn't get off of that and didn't treat it like every other day and every other thing I deal with, then it was going to hinder me. So I had to go in there and educate them. This is why I have a voucher, look at it this way, if you give me a lease for a year, I may not live out the lease, I make a joke out of it. And it drew attention off of the fact that, I was terminally sick, and that people were so scared of HIV and AIDS, and now when I came home, I got into supportive housing. So I'm with Providence House. I have my own apartment.
Yes.
My boss, Donna Hilton from A Little Piece of Light, helped me with that. I already had my voucher because I came home. I was, I had already had SSI and all of that before I went to prison. So I knew all I had to do was reactivate, I guess I got kind of lucky because it was during COVID when they were just coming off the COVID thing in New York. And people who were duly diagnosed, that's if you had AIDS and if you had cancer, they had to process your application for SSI and all of that within 48 hours.
Wow.
So when I first came home that we started looking into that, nobody was telling us that. And when we finally got tired of calling, one day a lady picked up and she was like, "Oh, we only do emergency, if the person is living with AIDS or their cancer." He says, "Well, my client has both." Like,
right.
Nobody ever told us that we were entitled to get this 48-hour review if she met the criteria, which she does. I got it right away, But I had already empowered myself. I came out while I was in prison. I learned from the other women who were sitting in these groups with me, because not only did they learn from me, I learned from them. I learned from seeing the women come back and forth in and out of prison. I had some of them tell me, "You know what? You're the lucky one." And I used to say, "Why am I lucky? I'm still in prison. You just went home." And they'd be like, "No, because the people that they help is the people that are HIV positive." I had somebody tell me, "I actually wish I was HIV positive, because y'all get more help than anybody else." Yeah, and I was like, "You are not correct, because if you have children, there's ways for you to, but you have to do the work. You can't just sit there and think that everything is going to come to you. You know what I'm saying?" So, that's the thing with everybody's not the same. Some people have a voice, some people don't, and it makes it more difficult if you are HIV positive, if you are trans, if you are black, if you've had trauma, to talk about that, because obviously somebody you trusted violated you in some way for you to undergo all this trauma. So you're not a very trusting person,
Yeah.
So you learn. Awesome.
Grace, same question. Access to housing, challenges. What did you experience?
I'm going to go back because I love giving history.
Uh-huh.
While you were
Let's give a short history.
While you were in custody, it went from HOPWA to HASA.
Okay.
When you came home, it was HASA. When I came home the first time in 1993, it was you applied for SSI and they gave it to you because the aura back then is that none of these people are going to be living alone anyway. This was the law. Everyone was being approved for SSI. Then comes along HASA. I go back to prison, second bid, and it's 1999 now, and I come back, and housing now has been established through HASA. And you had the M11Q form that was created because of HASA, and everything was prepared for you. But that even became a problem because according to what type of counselor you got, they would tell your information to people who had no business doing it. It didn't affect me, but it affected other people. I didn't have a problem with stigma because I was black and trans. You were going to judge me for something anyway. So my whole point is that that is how it was for a lot of people. Today, just today, not only is HASA still around and still serving, but here's the thing where we have to really realize. We can live now. We can live now. And that's the thing that I send out now. You can live. If you can live, you can get a job. If you can live, you can go to school. If you live, you can empower yourself of all those things. So I love that part.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so last, really quick, what's the most important thing you think the viewers should take away from today? One sentence. Most important.
Self-empowerment, regiment, and the life of others.
Beautiful. One sentence, what would you say?
Heal from within.
Heal from within. I love that. I love that. Thank you both.
Thank you.
So to our guests, I thank you for giving us your thoughts and observations about the intersections of housing discrimination and incarceration for women, members of the LGBTQIA+ community, and people living with HIV/AIDS. And I thank you, the viewers, for joining us for all of the thought-provoking discussion. In the meantime, on behalf of the Fortune Society, we thank you so much for tuning in to both sides of the bars. If you're interested in finding out more about the Fortune Society, please check us out on the web at fortunesociety.org. That's fortunesociety.org. Or on Facebook by typing in The Fortune Society. This is Shereemer Chevannes, and I appreciate you joining us as we critically look at both sides of the bars.